everyone, welcome back to the Esomar studio. A few minutes ago you watched the disaster stories from market research, a very interesting panel led by John, and I here with me also have Vanessa, who they were together on this panel, and we thought we'd grab them for a little deeper chat on that conversation. It's incredibly interesting. People always talk about successes. We're here to show the best side of what we do. We're here to show, the best achievements, and yet you guys are talking about what went wrong. So what inspired this conversation, basically?
Oh, well, I mean, the very fact that you come here every year and hear these great stories about, all these amazing things, and I think that we sort of shuffle failure under the carpet a bit. But I think that failure is such an important part of almost any form of discovery. Market research in particular, I mean, is almost embedded with failures. With every questionnaire, you have an idea of a question to ask, and you get the result back, and it doesn't tell you what you think. And so I thought that it'd be nice to have a session where we celebrated a bit of failure and accepted it and brought it out in the open a bit.
Why do you, sorry.
No, I was going to say, John basically sent me an email and said, Vanessa, could you help me tell failure stories? And I wasn't quite sure if I should be flattered or not, to sort of say, does he think I fail a lot? But I think my personal point of view is that if you're not failing, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough. And so if you're still in your comfort zone, you're going to be very conservative. And for us to be able to push forward as an industry and as teams and everything, we just need to push ourselves a little bit into that place where we're feeling a little uncomfortable and be okay with failure, and being able to be agile enough to quickly move again when we hit those barriers. So I think it was really insightful to be able to say to everybody, it's okay to fail. We've all failed, and our careers are still going okay. We haven't been fired yet. So I think it's a nice idea to be able to show people, especially young researchers, that they don't have to be afraid of failure. Yeah. So.
Do you think this is a specific trait of market researchers to kind of shy away from talking about that and actually admitting, with client relationships, you always try to kind of work through the process?
Put on a brave face, yeah. I mean, I did a rehearsal of this session with some of our own clients last week in Den Bosch in the Netherlands. And I was a little bit worried because no one volunteered any, and I think it is embarrassing sometimes to admit mistakes. And so I think the more you bring it out to the open and allow people to freely discuss it, anything that people don't talk about more regularly becomes a bit of a thing that people then don't want to talk about. And so hopefully just the process of opening up on it encourages people to be more candid. And today was it was a brilliant session, actually. I was amazed at the quality of people that came up and told a story, and you realise it's all prevalent in our industry, ultimately.
I was going to say, I think it's a really good question about whether our industry is a little bit more afraid of talking about failure. And I think that's because when we're in the room with the marketers and everybody, we're supposed to be the people with the integrity, and we're supposed to be the people who know, and the facts and the data, and we're not making mistakes, and we're reliable. And so I think to be able to admit that maybe we don't get it right every second of the day is almost challenging part of our equity as an industry. But I think we need to rethink that, because I think that we can be the people who are trying and thinking and innovating. Innovation requires failure. People who are innovators don't actually succeed the first time. I can't remember how many times it took James Dyson to get to the Dyson vacuum cleaner, but it was a lot, to the point where his wife was like, already give up. So I think that that's part of what we need to do to keep moving the industry forward at a pace, is to try, fail. Yeah.
Was it hard to find people to talk about this?
Well, when I sent out an email, no one really responded. But then yesterday I went around and just talked one-on-one to people, and just about every person I spoke to had a little story. And overnight I was worrying about not having enough people to speak. And then today I actually had too many. And so, yeah, you realise that, I mean, it's something you have to tease out with a bit of human interaction, perhaps. It's not necessarily someone's going to coldly volunteer via an email. And I mean, there's a thing there that recognises the difference between qual and quant research, really. When you, as a human being, going to talk to someone and tell them something a bit more candidly, it's amazing how much they're open up. Yeah.
And as I said, it was kind of a bit like safety in numbers. When you basically know that you're all going to stand up and admit it, it's a lot easier than just being the sole person who's standing up and saying, I got it wrong. So, but it was interesting as the panel was going on, watching people nod, you know, where like John was saying, has anybody got a bloated tracker? And everyone's like, and looking down and things like that. So yeah, so I think, yeah.
So can we get into it? What kind of things did you learn today or hear about?
Well, I mean, I think that I think we just heard some common things that happen in market research. I mean, I think that one of the biggest, most common things that goes wrong is, your interpretation of data or how you script a questionnaire can lead to some really quite significant errors in data. Kathy Frankovich told a very poignant story about basically rephrasing a question to measure people's awareness of the Holocaust and whether they were Holocaust deniers or not. And it was simply the basis that they asked this misframed question that encouraged people to give a vague response, and it delivered a wrong statistic that became a much quoted fact in society. They were talking about 20% of the population denying the existence of the Holocaust. When they actually reworded the question, did it properly, it dropped down to 2%. A really dramatic difference, and you realise how, powerful. We generate facts left, right, and centre, and that bit of information gets used to make really important decisions. And so, perhaps one of the things that makes it difficult to admit mistakes is how often when there's a lot of state of actually having to be right, or rather people have to trust what you generate. So, yeah.
I think sometimes, mistakes can be from just us getting into a state of complacency where we're not really thinking or checking. And sometimes you look at things and you'll get like a third party or somebody, a younger junior researcher who might basically say, why are we doing it this way? Or why did you do that? Because they're seeing it with fresh eyes. And sometimes we get into a little bit of same old. I told the story on the stage about our benchmarks, and our benchmarks hadn't been updated for 10 years. And we'd all kind of got used to the idea of we do a study, it gets thrown into the database, and we just assumed things. But no one actually took the time to check. And so I think part of our failures at times are because we end up in a comfort zone and a complacency, and we're not being a little tough on ourselves to say, is this right? Is this the right way that the question is being asked? How many times have we written a tracker, the bloated tracker, and I asked my team to do the tracker, and they were like, this is insane. And I was like, and we actually work for the company, and we don't like doing it. So why would consumers like doing it? And so, my question would be, how many of us have taken our own surveys? Yeah. Often not, right?
So take a moment and basically just look around and disrupt the processes that we, kind of get used to doing.
But be okay with failing too. Yeah. It's okay.
I think probably, you haven't asked this as a question, but I think there have been some seminal moments in our business where we really hit the rocks with an issue. We made something. I remember we created, when we first had our software up and running, we created the survey. It was so big, our survey system fell over. It was 200 questions long, and we just simply had no way of fielding this study. And over the course of the weekend, I think we did more innovative steps at a development level than in the history of the previous 5 years. It was basically
interesting though.
Crisis innovation and how it brings out the best. And the programming team came with this genius idea to pre-stream the questions in the background where they're asking another question. So we asked an open-ended question that took them 15 seconds to answer. It gave it the chance to load up in the background, and the questions then loaded, and that sort of solved one of the big problems, and that came out of like an absolute crisis moment.
I was going to say crisis moments are things that do force people to innovate. So, when we think about all the polling and when everybody was saying Clinton was going to win and not Trump, and then suddenly it all turned on its head, everybody started questioning how polling research was being done and how could it get it so wrong? And so sometimes crisis and failure creates us to look again and to create those new innovations. So I think, sometimes, this is what we need. We need a crisis to go, oh my God, and then we'll take another look, yeah.
Will there be, so there seems to be an incredible value to what you talked about. Will there be any future to this? Will you continue this project maybe in some way?
I don't know. I think there was definitely a bit of a paper.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Failure.
Research Failures Anonymous.
I think that I don't know. I think there's room for maybe a sort of philosophical paper on the value of crisis innovation and what you can achieve, and looking at successes that come out of failures, possibly, and looking at how businesses have grown through embracing failure. I think that if you can embed recognizing failures in your organisation. We have a session that, I mean, literally we share, I mean, excuse the word, we share fuck-ups, literally.
And on like TV?
And that drives improvements. And I think that every company should talk about and share for the next generation, because you're often making the same mistakes over and over again that you shuffle away, and then the younger generation in business coming through don't get to be aware of it, and especially things like project management issues and problems. The more you can share about what's gone wrong in the past, the more armed people are to deal with those sorts of situations in the future. I think there's a really famous study about Starbucks where they basically asked people to think about where mistakes could go wrong and how they would deal with it.
Yes. Yeah. But I think also too, we have to create within agencies and within like client side as well, space for failure to happen. So often the stakes are too high. So if you're doing projects for big brands, launches and things like that, the stakes are too high to fail. So we need to create spaces where people can actually fail. So whether it's a new tool development fund or something where the money is not on the line and it's going to be your career on the line. So I think creating space for that, I think, is really important. Yeah, and that's from the client side as well as from the agency side. Otherwise, we won't innovate. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. This was incredibly interesting, very informative, and hopefully we continue this conversation, as you say. And we keep failing, we keep learning from it. Absolutely. Thank you both very much. Really, really interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.